any other election, we Wisconsin Capitol reporters would be dashing from press conference to press conference in the Capitol press room. We would be covering events. We would be on the road, but this is not any other year. And so I'm in my basement trying to cover politics, and I've asked for other Capitol reporters to talk about covering politics in a pandemic. So I'm so grateful, and I want to thank Amy Reid of WISCTV3 in Madison, Laurel White of the Wisconsin Public Radio, Scott Bauer, Capitol Correspondent for the Associated Press, Patrick Marley of Capitol Reporter for the Milwaukee Journal. Thanks. Okay, real quick, I'm in my basement. Amy, where are you?
I'm in my living room. Yes, I'm in my living room.
Laurel.
Guest room.
Scott.
Basement.
Patrick.
I'm in my living room.
Okay, and one of the interesting things, we can all see how well we all decorate. Okay, moving on, because we all have 1 o'clock Elections Commission. Okay, overview. How has reporting since March changed for we're professional reporters. We take pride in our profession. It's a craft. How has it changed? Who wants to go first, please?
I mean, it's changed a lot. Normally, I spend almost all of my time in the state capitol, writing from there, shuttling from committee rooms to the floor of the Assembly and the Senate, catching lawmakers in the hall, going to news conferences with the governor or lawmakers. Now I'm in my living room, as you can see, and 90% of my reporting is done by phone. There are far fewer in-person events to cover. I do go to, I was at Trump last week and go to other events. Capitol committee meetings when they happen, but they're a lot rarer than they typically would be.
Okay, somebody else chip in. Is this this big change, is it satisfying? Is it less satisfying?
I think it's really interesting, Steve, because it's challenging for me, in particular for radio, to get the kind of audio that we need now. Because normally for election features, which are usually so fun to do, I'm out in the field talking to people in person, visiting them, walking, following somebody as they do doors, something like that. That's really not as possible this year. So in a way, that's sad, obviously, and not fun. But it also kind of feels like hitting a gold mine whenever I get someone to call me back and do a phone interview about one of those things. So there's kind of a downside and an upside, I guess.
Well, and jumping off of what Laurel said, in TV, we are completely reliant on Zoom now. And it's especially difficult if we're trying to connect with a lawmaker or someone that has something to say about this election that lives in like a rural area. We're completely dependent on their internet connection, and they may not have one.
Well, but Amy, following up, congratulations on your Biden. You got Biden on Tuesday, correct?
Yes, we did. Thank you.
If we weren't in a Zoom online world, perhaps you wouldn't have got the Democratic candidate for president, right?
That's true. I should be more grateful about what technology has been able to do for this election. Yeah, who knows how it would look otherwise.
Scott, you're the veteran this year vis-a-vis others.
Yeah, I mean, what everyone else said, I was thinking back 4 years ago around this time, I was on an airplane with Mike Pence and going to events and huge rallies, and just like everybody else, going to these massive events with thousands of people. I've not left my basement. I've done no in-person events, unlike I think everybody else on the call. So I've done everything via Zoom, via live feeds, telephone. And what I've found is I think I'm actually working harder than before, because there is no downtime. There is no driving to the event. There is no anything. I mean, you're just constantly on because you're not going anywhere. So I found that to be, somewhat better, and that you have more time to work, but also harder because you're working more.
Well, just from a WisconsinEye perspective, for 5 election cycles, 5 two-year cycles, we have gone around the state interviewing candidates. But I think I did my 213 campaign interview today, starting in June before the primary. All of them now have been Zoom. And for the previous 4 cycles, we've insisted on in person. So it's just very, very interesting. Just another generic question. Do you generally feel you're a better or worse reporter when we are confined to online, just generally?
I feel like I'm the same quality of reporter, but reporting is harder now. So perhaps readers aren't getting as much information as they otherwise would. It's a lot easier for sources to ghost you. Not that anyone would ever not want to talk to me. But it used to be that you could go to a committee meeting to find them, just run into them in the hall, something like that. Now you're beholden to them calling you back or picking up the phone when they call. And sometimes people don't want to talk. That makes it harder to track down public officials.
I would second that. I think the access issue, the lack of access, is the biggest challenge. Not being in the Capitol where people work and having access to people, or not being able to go to their office and find them, or at an event or anything like that. I think that's the biggest hurdle that comes to mind, other than making it more difficult to be at breaking news events that are happening that you can't get remotely, like a protest or like a spontaneous event.
Well, here's what I miss. Going to a press conference, all the time before the press conferences, all the aides, all the flacks from both sides of what's being presented are really great sources. And prior to the formal news conference, and I really miss that. So I don't think I'm as good a reporter, but Laurel, Amy, what do you think?
I would definitely piggyback on what Patrick and Scott said. But I was thinking about the events that I would go to that weren't political events this time of year. So you go to a rally to get perspective from a partisan, you go to a protest, they obviously have a perspective too. I really liked going to something like the Dane County Farmers Market to get a sense of people who aren't necessarily really keyed in politics, but have opinions and have thoughts. And it's a lot harder to find those folks right now because regular people aren't just milling around in places where I can go bother them and have, 70% of them say, leave me alone, but 30% will talk to me. I miss talking to those people.
But 70%, why do they say, leave me alone, Laura?
Because I have a scary microphone. I'm a very scary person.
But Amy's got not only a microphone, but a camera. Amy, what's been your experience?
Yeah, it can be tricky. A lot of people would prefer to call in, do a phone interview kind of thing. Again, with our medium, it's difficult to to do that for every single one. It is tricky to get people over Zoom. And for a lot of the challenges that these other people have said, like what Scott said about always having to be on, that's been challenging. But I would definitely defer to these other reporters, since I've only been in this position for almost a year. I've done the majority of my reporting in this role during the pandemic. So it's pretty difficult for me to compare outside, but it has been a challenge.
Well, Amy, you're the newbie, so let's take advantage of that. What are your impressions now of, congratulations, it's a great job being a political reporter for Channel 3, but your initial impressions of politics in the Capitol, please, just shortly, quickly.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see how this plays out. I come from a state that's dominantly Republican. I'm originally from Utah. There's not this kind of back and forth like there is in Wisconsin. It's not really up for debate. Republicans pretty much win at everything out there. So it's been very interesting to see this go back and forth being in Wisconsin.
What guidance have you got from your employers in terms of staying safe? Scott, has your employer said you don't have to leave your basement just because of fears of your personal safety? Yes.
The AP has been very clear that it's up to reporters as to whether they feel comfortable covering an event in person. Unfortunately, we've had 3 AP reporters worldwide die from COVID-19. So they've been very clear and firm in that we do not have to go out if we don't want to. There are a high number of reporters who are going out sporadically and covering events. Obviously, we have reporters traveling with the president, traveling with Joe Biden, but I have not done that this year.
Somebody else on their employers, Amy, with your need for a camera crew, plus you, what guidance has Channel 3 given you?
Channel 3 has been phenomenal during this as far as making sure that we're always feeling safe. My news director would never ask us to go into a situation where we didn't feel comfortable. They're providing us with masks, with hand sanitizer, so with the equipment that we would need to go out there. If there's a situation like, for example, the rally against the Safer at Home order earlier this year, we had specific instruction that we didn't really want to get in the middle of the crowd. We felt it's important to get that perspective, but we have to also weigh the safety of the crew. And they try to just keep us on the outskirts so that we weren't really, during a pandemic, getting involved in a big group of people.
And then Laurel, the guidance from public radio.
Our leadership has been so wonderful. They say, don't go out if you're not comfortable. We've had a number of conversations about how to be safe out in the field. We've gotten additional equipment. I actually have a 6-foot-long boom pole that I'm doing interviews with now when I'm out in the field. So I have that more distance than I normally do when I'm chatting with someone, which makes it a little bit more intimidating as I'm walking a boom pole than before, but it's nice to have that distance.
And then Patrick, let's close the loop. The update from JS.
Sure. The Journal Sentinel, similar to these others, has really put reporter safety first, and only covering in-person events when we feel they're safe. I think one issue we wrestled with a lot during the summer was when we had unrest happening and these very large protests that turned violent in some cases. Knowing when we needed to pull back and get out for our own safety, and I think we tried to be extremely careful about that. But also, being able to be there as much as we could so that we had eyes on it and could report to the public what was happening.
Well, I understand the professional decisions that we've all been making for 7 months. Let me ask you this. Have any of you ever felt, I do feel some personal risk here in terms of COVID because of the in-person interviewing? Scott, you've been in your basement. Maybe you don't want to answer, but somebody else? Have you ever felt?
Sure. I was at some protests where there were a lot of people around. I was at the Trump rally where there were thousands of people on Saturday. And for most of that time, the press was far from the crowd, but I did want to talk to some Trump supporters. So, we were outdoors. It was very windy, but it's a calculated risk. And sure, there are times when I've been in places that, a room got more crowded than I expected it to be. You try to be as careful as you can.
Well, I've only been tested once for COVID because I had to have a hip transplant. I've not been tested at all professionally. Have you guys been tested? I'm just curious.
I was for the, I covered some parts of the Democratic National Convention to the extent that it existed in Milwaukee, and they had a very rigorous testing protocol for that. You couldn't get into certain rooms without a test 24 hours in advance. So I did that and fortunately got good results. Anybody else been tested in connection with your job?
I've gone 3 different times. I was covering a lot of the protests earlier this year in Madison over the summer. So those were groups, sometimes thousands of people. So I would go after that. And then I also covered Pence's event in Darien, which was actually indoors in a warehouse facility. And the press area was kind of in the middle of surrounded by the crowd. And there were quite a few people there. So I went and got tested after that as well.
Amy, how about you? Have you been tested in connection with your job?
Not in connection for work, no.
Okay, understand. Patrick mentioned the Trump rally. I've got this question. When the president talks about fake news, let me ask my fellow reporters, is he aiming at the National Traveling Press Corps, the National Press Corps, or do you feel that comes down and he's also, by implication, dealing with state capitol reporters and local reporters? Your reaction to when the president says fake news?
I just say that I don't see him making a distinction very often. Obviously, most of the time he's talking about national news. He's calling out publications that are national in scope, like the New York Times or CNN. That said, he's not, saying, your local reporting is great, or everybody subscribe to a newspaper in their state. And so I think it maybe matters less what the president says and what sinks in with the broader public. And I think the message to the public often is the press is bad or the press is against them, which is a statement I do not agree with.
I'm just going to talk about my reaction to fake news. I was asked about this by my daughter-in-law, who's a Trump supporter, and here's what I said. In my profession, 5 decades, I haven't always gotten it right, but I've always tried to get it right. So I'm just curious, anybody's reaction to the president's fake news before we move on to a different subject? Scott, what do you think?
Well, certainly he's not the only person we cover who blames the media when there's something they don't like. So fake news charge by other names has been around since the beginning of journalism. It'll be around long after, in some form or another, after this president's out of office, whenever that is. So, you know, you don't get into journalism to be loved necessarily. You get in to hopefully, you know, tell people what's going on in a fair and accurate way.
Have any, you made a decision, we've all made decisions to cover some in-person events. After they're over, has anybody gotten in your faces in terms of tell the truth? Remember from the Act 10 protests when we were barricaded in the governor's press room and the protesters were shouting, tell the truth, tell the truth. Has anybody gotten in your face in terms of criticism from any event? Laurel?
Not this year, but I haven't been out to as many political rallies this year as I was in 16 or 18. I had that happen in both 16 and 18. So I think if I was out more this year, it probably would have happened. But the interaction with the folks at just the 2 rallies I've been to has been more limited.
Amy, anybody getting your grill?
No one really comes up in my face, but it's pretty common going to these rallies to have people afterward, before, say, tell the truth, fake news, yell at us. I mean, even covering at an Oshkosh rally earlier this year, there was a band set up across the street that came up with a song, maybe on the spot, about fake news. But, you know, it doesn't really impact the way that I'm going to cover it. And you just kind of put up a shield, I think, as a reporter, and you realize what your job is about. And it's not about pleasing everyone, like it's been said.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And it goes back to what Scott said. We didn't get into this business to be loved, but journalism is a relationship. I mean, we really enjoy talking to people, picking up tips. My former editor, Marty Kaiser, says gathering string for the next story. So I guess my next question is, if we have to continue to stay in my basement and online, next 6, 7, 8 months, and do you anticipate doing anything differently?
One thing I've thought about lately is, when the legislature comes back next year and we're writing a budget, debating a budget, spending a lot of time in Joint Finance Committee, what's that going to look like? How's that going to be different? I imagine it'll be some kind of hybrid like we've seen when they've come in already, where they broadcast online and some people are there in person, some aren't. I can't imagine at this point a world where everyone's packed into the joint finance room like they typically are. So maybe for reporters, there'd be some kind of rotating pool opportunity. It's definitely going to be, I think the first half of next year, which is a busy time in the State House, is going to be unlike any we've seen before.
Anybody else looking ahead to the next budget session?
I mean, I would entirely echo what Scott just said. I've been thinking with a little bit of dread about how we cover the state budget, because you do have this Joint Finance Committee meeting. I mean, they do the real work of the budget, and a lot of surprises come. They can come with no warning. I guess that's the nature of a surprise. But, in the middle of the night, late at night, a very complex issue gets raised, and there's a memo about it. But to think that you can figure it out in 5 minutes is not always easy. And when you're in that room, you've got aides, you've got lawmakers, you've got the very helpful legislative fiscal bureau, and you can go ask questions and just make sure you understand these complex issues and then explain them to readers. That's going to be really hard to do from my living room if I'm just zooming in to watch the Joint Finance Committee.
Which is kind of my next question. In this era of covering the Capitol by online, are sources more or less available? So Patrick, you kind of just said kind of less, right?
Well, sure. I mean, in that example, you can't get them. I mean, we have incredible access with technology, right? You can text people, you can call them, you have all sorts of ways to reach them. So if you have people who are willing to talk to you, there's more ways than ever to get in touch. And like Scott and the others were saying earlier about, being available all the time, you're talking to people more often. So in that way, you have the same level of access, but you don't run into people on the street like you used to. And a lot of times you get a great story tip just by bumping into somebody on the Capitol Square, and they would say, "Oh, did you hear about this?" Or "I just saw that," or "We're doing whatever." And the next thing you know, you have a story that's gone.
I want to build off what Patrick said, which I agree with everything he said. And the one thing that I think has been markedly more challenging is getting leadership who were easier to track down in the hallways of the Capitol, or to run into, or to know where they would be and get something from them. Now they are much more guarded and much less available than they were when we caught them on their way to the bathroom.
Okay. Just a couple more questions, because, we all got Elections Commission in a few minutes. Do you think our readers, viewers, followers are more interested now that we have to report in different ways and their sources of information may be more limited? Are they following us more because of the pandemic, or not much? What do you think, Laurel?
Well, I mean, I know at WPR, our website traffic has been very high throughout the pandemic. So I think people are consuming more news than they have been, at least for us. I think there are a lot of people who've been very burnt out as well.
Right.
So maybe people are just taking turns and it's coming in waves, but our high numbers have been pretty consistent.
Okay. Are you seeing that as well, Amy? Have you seen anything to indicate that?
Yeah, I believe that same kind of things. Digital traffic up after all of this started. I think, people started to get burnt out. It started to become a lot to have to stay up on. So maybe that's died down a little bit, but interest, I think, is picking back up again with the election and how the pandemic ties into that. It's showing to be a huge issue for voters. So, of course, they're tuning in.
After more than 30 years in the Capitol, I miss that press room. I miss the give and take where anybody would walk in to say anything, even outrageous. And it was a very accessible press room. I don't know when we're going to get that back. Anybody else like me miss that give and take in the press room?
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally miss it. I mean, it's like you say, you hear people in the hall, you can run out there, you can bounce things off. Scott sits across the room from me, Laurel stops in regularly, Amy stops in regularly. You can talk to these people, just get their impressions of things, maybe get a perspective that you weren't seeing before.
Okay, maybe last question, because we got other business to do. Why do we stay in this business, even with the challenges of a pandemic? I'm going to call on all of you. Scott, you.
Well, I got to eat, Steve. I mean,
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, seriously, we're out there so other people don't have to be, whether we're physically there or doing what we're doing. We're reporting on the news because other people are living their lives. I mean, that's true whether it's a pandemic or not. We have a front row seat. We have hopefully the expertise needed to boil down what's going on and present it to people in a way that they can digest easily and understandably, and have a window into the democracy and the world we're all living in.
Wow. He took us to school. Okay, Laurel.
It's hard. It's a hard act to follow. But I would say, I do genuinely believe that we are doing an important public service. And as much of the criticism that's out there, and we certainly hear that every day. I know I just did a beast of a story about polling and how it's changed since 2016. And it was rough and it took a while. And I put it out there and someone messaged me on Twitter and said, "Thank you so much for doing this. It was really informative. I learned something from it." And that has kind of made my week. So that's why I'm still here.
That's a great answer. Amy, bring the energy of somebody who's only been our Capitol for a year, please. Why do you do it?
The truth's important, and it's important to bring it to people. It's difficult to track down on your own. And so being able to do this as part of a newsroom and bring it to people at such an important point in history is great.
What a great soundbite. Tough to follow. Patrick.
Yeah, it's tough to follow everybody. I feel that journalism serves a crucial purpose for democracy, and I love doing it, and I want to keep doing it. We can complain about this or that criticism that we face, but really we're very privileged to be able to have this job. We have a front row in history. It's amazing.
Okay, I have loved this discussion, but we all have to go to the Elections Commission, so I'm going to thank Amy, Laurel, Scott, Patrick. Thank you very much. Capitol Roundtable adjourned. I'll see you in the Capitol someday, hopefully. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.